The desert exhales as evening falls over Saqqara. The horizon dissolves into gold and smoke, and the air trembles with that peculiar stillness that comes just before darkness settles. Beneath these sands, where the first pyramids of Egypt still hold their breath, explorers once spoke of a sealed passage, half buried beneath the necropolis. They said it led not to a tomb, but to something far older, a sanctuary of written stone. Steps sink softly into the sand. The lantern flame bends to the wind. Under layers of limestone and silence lies a narrow corridor, its entrance carved with faint symbols: the feather of Ma'at, the ibis of Thoth, a circle enclosing a star. Every surface bears the same rhythm of chisels used nearly 5,000 years ago, during the age of Djoser, when scribes believed words could summon eternity. The path descends in spirals, lit only by the small trembling glow that clings to your fingers. On the walls, the hieroglyphs do not read like prayers or royal decrees, but like equations of the cosmos. Some align perfectly with constellations known to the ancient priests of Heliopolis. Others trace patterns that no modern star chart recognizes. Archaeologists once found fragments nearby, shards of diorite engraved with sequences scholars could not translate. One noted the presence of strange astronomical motifs, spirals within spirals, carved with tools far sharper than the copper chisels of the period. The deeper the descent, the heavier the air grows, as if time itself thickens here. Then, the passage widens into a hall of impossible quiet. The walls glimmer under torchlight, covered in thousands of etched symbols. They are not written in rows, but in flowing arcs that curve like the Nile seen from the heavens. The effect is almost musical, a symphony of signs that rise and fall in rhythm. Perhaps this was never meant to be a library in the way we imagine. Not a room of scrolls or papyrus, but a living archive. The stone itself is the book. Each carving hums faintly when touched, a vibration too soft to be sound. Dust drifts from the ceiling like falling ash, illuminated in narrow shafts of golden light. Somewhere, water drips, slow, deliberate, as though marking time. In the center stands a low pedestal of alabaster. On its surface rests a slab of dark basalt, smooth as obsidian. Across it runs a single line of hieroglyphs older than any known script, perhaps predynastic, perhaps something else entirely. A serpent coils into a circle. Inside it, the word Ankh glows faintly. Life, sealed, unbroken. Scholars once believed the idea of a library of Thoth was only a myth, mentioned in scattered Coptic manuscripts and later Greek accounts. Yet here, beneath the dunes, every wall speaks as though the legend were breathing. The priests of Memphis wrote that Thoth kept his greatest writings hidden from mankind, guarded by enchantments that punished those who sought to reveal divine knowledge. One papyrus now kept in the Cairo Museum describes verses carved into the ribs of the earth, for the gods alone to read. The words might have meant this place. A quiet wind moves through the passage behind you, the kind that seems to whisper, though no one speaks. The flame flickers, and for a heartbeat the carvings shimmer like stars reflected in black water. Each line seems to pulse with memory, as if the chamber itself were alive, remembering every gaze that had ever fallen upon it. The question lingers like breath on stone. Were these inscriptions hidden to protect their readers, or to protect the world from what they reveal? The ancient Egyptians feared certain kinds of knowledge, not because it was false, but because it was too perfect, too eternal, too close to the divine. Far ahead, there is a doorway sealed by centuries of rock. The surface hums faintly, not with air or echo, but something subtler: vibration, rhythm, perhaps even a voice beneath the threshold of hearing. The hieroglyphs around the frame depict eyes closing, a sun sinking, a mouth sealed by silence. Feels less like a warning and more like a prayer. And somewhere in the blue hush before dawn, when even time holds its breath, the air above Hermopolis still hums, light remembering how to become stone. Far out in the western desert, beyond the reach of the Nile, lies a place that maps once called Bahariya Oasis, though the ancients named it something else, Paraiman, the House of Hidden Wind. To those who travel there, the silence feels alive. The air itself whispers, curling through ruins as if carrying old prayers. Among the scattered stones of an ancient temple, archaeologists once found a circular pit that hums when the desert breathes. It was first documented in 1934 by Ahmed Fakhri, the Egyptian archaeologist who studied the oases of the Sahara. The local Bedouin told him that the pit spoke, that on windless days it gave answers. The villagers called it the talking well. Fakhri noted that the sound was unlike any echo he had heard. A low vibration, rhythmic and almost human, resonating from deep within the rock. The site appears to have belonged to a small sanctuary dedicated to Thoth, the god of knowledge and speech. Fragments of limestone reliefs show the ibis-headed god holding a scroll, surrounded by spirals of air. In one inscription, the hieroglyph for breath is repeated 13 times, a strange redundancy, as though breath itself was being invoked. At sunset, the hollow begins to sing. The sound rises with the cooling of the air, a deep tone, then a softer one, blending into a chorus that seems to answer the wind. Scientists explain it as a natural resonance, caused by wind tunnels beneath the limestone. But the precision of its rhythm, the almost deliberate phrasing, feels uncanny. Even now, recordings taken there reveal tonal patterns that mimic speech frequencies, as if the earth itself were forming syllables. Legends around Bahariya tell that the pit was once the oracle of dust and breath, tended by priestesses who interpreted the desert's voice. They did not speak. They listened. When the air flowed through the temple's chambers, it carried words formed by the world's first silence. The oracle was consulted not for prophecy, but for truth, to hear what the gods refused to write. Near the site, archaeologists found clay tablets bearing faint Coptic script. One fragment reads, "He who listens to the dust will know what endures." Another, older still, inscribed in Greek, mentions a voice that dwells between grains of sand. It suggests that, even in later ages, pilgrims still came here, seeking meaning in the murmur of wind and stone. The chamber's architecture is unlike other oracles. There is no room for a statue, no altar. The structure seems designed for acoustics, sloping walls that funnel air toward the central pit, niches that amplify tone. Perhaps it was built not to summon gods, but to let the world speak through itself. In the cool of twilight, as the desert darkens, the tone deepens. It vibrates through the bones, not the ears. Some listeners report hearing words, not in any known tongue, but in patterns the mind translates as meaning. Remember, return, breathe. When the British scholar Gerald Lancaster Harding visited the site in the 1940s, he described the sensation as standing inside a throat made of stone. He believed it was an ancient sound chamber, engineered to imitate the divine voice. Yet no tools or evidence of carving have ever been found in the pit's lower strata, only smooth, wind-shaped curves, as if time itself had sculpted speech. You lift the lantern one final time. The glow touches the sealed door, and something inside it seems to breathe. The sound is low, like sand shifting in deep caverns. Then nothing, only the echo of your own pulse. At night, the temperature drops suddenly. The air contracts, and the hum fades into a whisper. In that silence, the desert feels infinite, a cathedral without roof or wall. The stars shimmer, and the wind returns with a sigh that seems almost human. The oracle sleeps again. No one knows who first built it or whether it was built at all. Perhaps it is older than Egypt, a remnant of some forgotten faith that listened instead of prayed. The desert remembers such things. It stores the vibrations of every word ever spoken, pressed into its dust. And so, the oracle of dust and breath remains. Not a ruin, but a conversation still unfolding. The wind enters, the stone answers, and between them, a voice is born. Perhaps that voice is not the gods. Perhaps it is the earth remembering how to speak. In the shadowed halls of Thebes, where the wind moves like breath through pillars of sandstone, archaeologists once uncovered a chamber that should not have existed. It lay beneath the temple of Karnak, sealed by slabs of granite older than the pharaohs themselves. When the passage was opened, the air that emerged was cool and sweet, as if preserved since the dawn of time. Inside, there were no sarcophagi, no relics of kings, only rows of stone chests, each the size of a man. Their lids were carved with spirals, feathers, and concentric suns. And within them, fragments of scrolls made not of papyrus, but of something tougher, translucent, the texture of pressed reed and mica. Under flickering torchlight, the surface of the scrolls shimmered as though alive. The expedition's records, led by Georges Legrain in 1903, described these scrolls as impossibly ancient, written in symbols unrecognizable even to hieroglyphic scholars. Their language seemed half pictorial, half musical, as if each line were both word and sound. Legrain wrote that when wind passed through the chamber, the scrolls themselves seemed to hum faintly, vibrating like instruments strung with silence. Later analysis revealed traces of carbon dating older than 3,500 BCE, centuries before Egypt's first dynasty. Even more unsettling was the pigment, a mixture of ochre and meteoritic iron, materials found only in celestial debris. Scientists could not replicate its reflective quality, a soft, golden glow visible even in darkness. Somewhere above, the desert continues to move, dunes reshaping, winds rewriting the face of the earth. Yet this place remains untouched, humming beneath the centuries. A library without pages, a story carved into silence. Local monks from the nearby monastery of Deir el-Bahari warned the team that they had found the sleep of the gods, writings said to have been hidden when heaven withdrew from the earth. According to fragments of late Coptic texts, these scrolls were composed by beings who once walked in radiance, recording memories of a world before men dreamed. They were sealed away, it said, so the divine mind could sleep. Some scrolls have since vanished. Only 3 fragments remain in museum archives, each showing patterns rather than text. Loops of fire, circles around eyes, a spiral descending into a point. Interpreted mathematically, the lines mirror orbital ratios of planets unknown to the Egyptians, including the outer giants, unseen by ancient eyes. What mind drew these patterns? What voice dreamed in metal and dust before language was born? One tablet found beside the scrolls bore a single inscription in early hieratic. The gods sleep, so that creation may continue. The chamber was resealed soon after discovery. The scholars who handled the scrolls reported strange side effects: sleeplessness, vivid dreams of vast golden fields and silent cities beneath the stars. One wrote, "They do not merely describe, they remember. And when you read them, they remember you." Today, the site beneath Karnak is closed to the public. Officially, it is classified as a structural hazard. Unofficially, locals say it hums at night. Travelers speak of faint tones rising through the ground. Not voices, but harmonies, soft as breath. Perhaps the scrolls were never meant to be read aloud. Perhaps they were songs left unfinished, the memory of creation, folded into silence until the gods wake again. When the wind passes through the ruins at dusk, the air vibrates like a note on the edge of hearing. Fades, returns, fades again, like breathing. The scrolls may still lie there, dreaming in their stone cradles, recording the slow sleep of eternity. And maybe, as night deepens over Thebes, the gods themselves turn once more in their rest, stirred by the sound of their own forgotten words. In a small chamber buried beneath the sands of Saqqara, explorers once found an object that baffled both scientists and priests. A mirror that showed everything except the one who gazed into it. Its surface of polished obsidian was flawless, and yet no reflection ever appeared. Perhaps what lies behind the door was never meant to be read. It was discovered in 1926, inside a collapsed annex of a priest's tomb from the 6th dynasty. Near the step pyramid of Djoser, archaeologist Cecil Firth recorded it in his notes as a disk of black stone that absorbs rather than reflects light. When lanterns shone upon it, the flame dimmed. When touched, the stone felt cool, almost damp, as though breathing. Ancient inscriptions found nearby called it the Eye of Night. The hieroglyphs described it as a door that remembers. They warned, to see oneself is to bind oneself. Look instead at what looks back. At first, the team thought it superstition, a ritual tool perhaps used by priests of Ptah, god of creation, through speech and vision. But analysis revealed the mirror's composition was not pure obsidian. Embedded within were microscopic veins of meteoritic nickel and glass, a substance no known technique of the time could have fused. Under lamplight, the mirror behaved strangely. While it reflected no human form, the room around it appeared inverted, dim, and trembling, as if viewed through water. When the archaeologists moved, the reflection did not follow. It remained still, frozen in a scene slightly different from reality, like a memory of the room rather than its present state. One night, a researcher claimed that within the dark surface he saw stars, faint constellations spinning slowly where his face should have been. The others laughed until they saw it too. A swirl of light deep within the stone, forming patterns of the night sky over Egypt, circa 2500 BCE, but reversed, as though viewed from above the earth rather than below it. Scholars later linked this to the Hermopolitan cosmogony, the belief that creation began with reflection, when the primeval waters first beheld their own image and gave birth to light. Perhaps this mirror was not made to show the self, but to reveal what sees us, the consciousness of the cosmos itself. A late Demotic papyrus held in the Cairo Museum refers to a mirror of Ptah that was veiled to spare men from their truth. It claimed that whoever looked upon it saw not their body but their essence, and that few could bear to continue. After the discovery, the mirror was sent to Cairo for study. But weeks later, the storage chamber reportedly filled with condensation, though sealed. Instruments placed near it malfunctioned. The mirror was eventually locked in a wooden crate labeled Artifact 47B. Restricted. It has not been displayed since. Yet the legend persists. Guards at the museum whisper that sometimes, when the building is quiet, the box hums faintly, a pulse like breathing. Physicists who later examined surviving notes speculated that the obsidian surface, fused with meteoritic material, might act as a form of light trap, absorbing and re-emitting photons at frequencies too low for human vision. But others, reading the priest's warnings, concluded something simpler. Perhaps the mirror refuses reflection not because it cannot, but because it remembers too much. Perhaps the truest knowledge waits not in light, but in stillness. To reflect the world is to relive it. To remember everything is to cease to be separate. When night falls over Saqqara, the air above the necropolis gleams faintly, as if brushed by an unseen mirror. The stars shimmer, but something in their light feels heavier, aware. Perhaps that mirror still lies somewhere in its crate, absorbing centuries of silence, reflecting only what the universe chooses to recall. And perhaps that is its secret, that the divine never looks at us, only through us. Moonlight lays a pale road across the water at Siwa Oasis. The salt lakes hold the sky like open eyes, and the ruined citadel of Shaili rises from the dark like a coral reef turned to dust. Walls once built of kershef, blocks pressed from salt, clay, and crushed shells, still glow softly where the moon touches them, as if the night were reading. Footprints on the shore crisp into white edges and, even as you watch, begin to blur. Here memory hardens. Here memory dissolves. The invitation begins with a glimmer, crystalline crusts that crackle under the sandal, fragile hexagons that grow and melt with the breath of heat. Long before these lakes shrank to mirrors, the Sahara was green. During the Holocene humid period, roughly 9,000 to 5,000 years ago, rains carved ponds and inland seas across the western desert. When the climate shifted, most waters retreated. What remained settled into bowls of brine, leaving behind halite lace and beds of natron, the sacred salt the embalmers carried north from Wadi Nat Run. In temple texts, natron was purity itself, the white breath that preserved a name beyond decay. In daily life, it was a mineral that bit the tongue and cleaned the body. In both, it was an alphabet of endurance. The city written in salt is not marked on a single map. It appears in pieces, in the soft, pale bricks of Shaili, in the evaporation pans combed like pages near the Qatar Depression, in the glistening shores of Birkat Siwa where travelers float as if the water remembered them lighter. Local builders still lift kershef blocks from pits after the sun has thickened them, stacking the walls in courses that drink the night and shed the day. Kershef is strong when kept dry. It shivers and slumps when rain persists, Old men in Siwa still tell of the season in 1926 when heavy downpours came and parts of Shaylee's high ramparts softened, sloughing like snow. A city spelled by salt must be rewritten often. There is a kind of hush in these streets, even when voices murmur. The air tastes faintly of iron and morning. A shard of halite, held to the ear, ticks as it warms. Hairline fractures reliving the day. In the market, slabs cut from the lake edge show growth rings like trees, each winter a paler band. Children press their palms to them and leave prints the stone will remember briefly, like a word said once and then forgotten. History touches down in small certainties. Alexander sought the oracle of Ammon here in the 4th century BCE, crossing the desert to be named sun. Greek travelers wrote of spring-fed gardens and shining pools, of a temple whose walls reflected so strongly that the sun seemed doubled. Far earlier, caravans hauled natron and salt toward the Nile, and along that route the monks of Wadi Natrun later kept their libraries, preserving the breath of a language in pages that crackled like dry shores. The desert kept count by glints. Yet the mystery is quieter than trade or fame. When wind moves across a salt flat at dusk, a tone rises, faint, insect-soft. The surface forms polygons. Their edges hum as the cooling air tightens the crust. Light does odd work here. Salt refracts. Salt scatters. Salt wears the sun like gauze. In the blue hour, shallow water lies invisible until the moon lifts it. A passerby becomes two shadows, one on ground, one trembling in the brine, walking together like a memory and its echo. And in that stillness, as the torch fades and your breathing slows, you realize the library beneath the sand is not only a place. It is a memory that remembers us. Somewhere near the northwest lake, a low wall shows signs of repeated rebuilding. Courses of kerchef interleaved with palm rib lattice, then more kerchef, then a gap where a door might have been. Archaeologists call it adaptive vernacular. The elders call it patience. A house in salt is a promise renewed with every season. To live here is to write and unwrite the same sentence until it knows how to breathe. Salt stores stories differently than stone. Limestone argues. Sandstone endures. Salt listens. Keeps the shape of a hand for a night and lets it go by morning. Pricks the tongue of memory. Makes thirst visible. Ancient embalmers rinsed the body with natron and recited words about clarity. The same mineral now prints star sheets on the flats, constellations that are footprints of wind. When dawn comes, they are gone. At the edge of the lake, you notice tiny cubes sprouting like winter grass. They rise from nothing, edges hard as rule lines, each a small decision made by water leaving. Touch one and it breaks with the neatness of glass. Within the break, there is another cube, smaller, repeating. The city of salt is built like this, a pattern inside a breath. Facts live here gently. Shaylee's oldest walls, 13th century. Kerchef. Salt plus clay plus silt. Good thermal mass. Vulnerable to rain. Natron. Sodium carbonate decahydrate mixed with sodium bicarbonate and salt. Used in mummification, cleansing, ritual. Siwa's lakes. High salinity sustains buoyancy. Evaporation drives crystal growth at margins. The Katara pans. Vast, hard white, mirage-prone, treacherous in war, lucid in winter light. Names like anchors, holding a raft of shimmer. Evening gathers. The citadel's hollows cradle a cooler darkness. A candle in a doorway turns a damp wall to crystal. Facets wake and lean the flame back to you in fragments. From somewhere, a reed flute tests 3 notes. The sound threads the lanes, catches in a broken arch, lingers where the plaster buckled years ago and never quite forgot how. There is a story the masons tell. When you plaster a kerchef wall, you sing under your breath. If you do not, the surface dries with small sorrows, hairlines that creep like quiet rivers. The song is not for the wall. It is for the salt in you, coaxing your own water to stay. You walk to the shoreline and stand where the lake receives the night. The city behind you barely weighs the air, everything lightened by powder and cool. Out across the flats, the moon writes a white sentence so long it loses itself. Tiny ripples answer, each word broken into facets, each facet into breath. Perhaps cities were always meant to be rehearsals. Practice rooms where the human mouth learns to say horizon without fear. Stone keeps the lesson stern. Salt keeps it kind. Here, the plan is in pencil. Here, erasure is not failure. It is the alphabet returning to silence to be ready again. Near midnight, a breeze crosses the water and the polygons shift. Lines that were certain become sleep. The citadel softens by a fraction no eye can measure. A crystal, half-formed at your feet, gives up its edge and becomes sand. Somewhere in the dark, a mason sets down his trowel and listens to the wall breathe. Perhaps the city written in salt does not wish to last. Perhaps it wishes to be rewritten. Each dusk a draft, each dawn a clean page. Some truths need stone. Others need a shore of light where the words can come and go without breaking. Night folds gently over the desert plateau. The last light of RA flickers across broken pillars, and the sound of wind hums low through the ruins of Abydos. The city where writing was once a sacred act, and silence, a kind of worship. Deep beneath a ruined temple, archaeologists uncovered fragments of a chamber that still smelled faintly of ink, though millennia had passed. On the walls, traces of black pigment lingered, hieratic script so delicate that even breath could erase it. You turn back. Your footprints dissolve behind you with the gentlest sound, like rain learning how to fall. By morning there will be no record that you came, and yet the water will remember the weight, and the crystals will grow differently for a day, and the air will taste, for one heartbeat after sunrise, of a name that does not need to be kept. Maybe that is the promise, that what returns to salt returns to the beginning, not lost but lightened, ready to be spoken again when the evening asks. At the edge of the Valley of the Kings, where cliffs rise like petrified wings, there is a passage that leads nowhere on any map. It is known among locals as Bab el Samt, the Gate of Silence. Few approach it now. The wind there does not whistle. It listens. Even the sand seems to hesitate before crossing its threshold. It was first noted in 1817 by Giovanni Belzoni, who mistook it for another sealed tomb. He described a narrow fissure that descends into soundlessness. Later, explorers found the tunnel led not to a chamber, but to a vast doorway cut into living rock, smooth, uninscribed, framed by two colossal pillars. The doorway ends abruptly, blocked by nothing visible, yet tools and torches alike refuse to pass its invisible border. The rock itself vibrates faintly, like a held note. When you speak near it, your voice does not return. There is no echo, no reflection, only the feeling of words being absorbed. Some believe it is a geological anomaly, a seam of limestone mixed with basalt that devours sound. Others say it is the threshold the priests of Abydos once described in funerary hymns, the place where breath is measured and voice is weighed. Inscriptions found higher along the cliff hint that this was once part of a mortuary complex of the late New Kingdom, perhaps an unfinished tomb for a forgotten ruler. The architects had begun the grand facade, but not the burial hall. Yet why carve a doorway that leads to nothing? Some scholars see it as a symbolic offering, a monument to the silence between lives. But there are other, stranger records. The explorer Amelia Edwards wrote in 1873 of hearing a pulse, like a heart beating under the mountain. And the Bedouin of Kurna tell a story older still, that the gods once built a gate to keep sleep within the earth, and that every 1,000 years it stirs. They say those who linger near it dream without closing their eyes. At twilight, the limestone burns gold, and the pillars cast no shadow. Birds that nest in the cliffs fall silent as the light fades. Even the air seems to pause its motion, as though remembering something vast. If you lay your ear against the stone, a low hum thrums deep within. A tone felt more than heard, steady, patient, eternal. Modern instruments have detected vibrations at a frequency below hearing, infrasound generated by wind currents through unseen cavities. The scientists called it resonance. The locals called it remembering. Both perhaps are true. Inside that hum lies a stillness impossible to name. It is not emptiness but fullness, the sound of everything listening. Priests of ancient Thebes believed that before creation, There was no silence and no noise, only waiting. When the first word was spoken, it shattered waiting into time. The gate of eternal silence, they said, was where that first word once paused, the still point between being and becoming. Some believe this was once the scriptorium of a solitary priest, a man whose name has vanished but whose hand still moves through time, the scribe who wrote for the afterlife. When explorers placed candles before the doorway, the flames leaned inward, drawn as if by breath. Photographs showed faint distortions, shadows bending toward the threshold. Some thought it magnetic interference. Others refused to speculate. One visitor described it best. It felt like standing before the mouth of a thought that had forgotten how to speak. By night, the stars above the valley shimmer with unusual clarity. The cliff face gleams with mica dust, catching starlight in a shimmer like frozen rain. If you remain long enough, your pulse begins to match the rhythm in the stone. You do not hear it, you become it. Perhaps that is the gate's purpose, not to lead somewhere, but to return everything that approaches to stillness, to teach the voice how to rest. Even now, the Bedouins say the gate must never be disturbed. They leave offerings of bread and salt, whispering as they set them down. So that silence may stay asleep, they say. There are no markers now, no tours, no paths. The desert covers the trail anew each year. But sometimes, travelers speak of hearing a tone carried by the wind at dusk. Long, steady, tender as a heartbeat. Perhaps the gate never closes. Perhaps it opens inward, endlessly, into the place where even light forgets its name. And in that pause, in that eternal breath, all things are held, waiting to be spoken again. In Egypt's old kingdom, the act of writing was divine labor. Scribes were more than record keepers. They were mediators between the visible and the unseen. Every stroke of the reed pen echoed the movements of creation itself, as if to write was to rebuild the world. Their ink was made from soot and ochre mixed with the waters of the Nile, and their brushes were carved from reeds that grew in its marshes. Each hieroglyph was not a letter, but a living symbol, a breath captured in form. The scribe whose presence lingers here did not serve kings or merchants. His texts were found not in archives, but beside mummified ibises, offerings to Thoth, god of wisdom and measure. On one surviving fragment, a line reads, "To write is to prepare the path for the soul." The ink bleeds faintly across the grain of limestone, as if still drying. Archaeologists traced the pigment to a rare composition, carbon mixed with traces of meteoritic iron. Such ink was reserved for rituals of resurrection, inscribing names meant to survive death. In quiet reverence, the man must have written under the dim flame of an oil lamp, copying words whispered through generations. Spells from the pyramid texts, formulas of rebirth, maps to eternity. In his solitude, perhaps he began to add his own lines. Words that did not follow tradition, gentle reflections carved in secrecy. If the soul remembers its name, it will never die. Beneath that, another inscription, softer, as if written with hesitation. But who remembers the scribe? He may have written through the night, his brush moving like a heartbeat, his fingers blackened by devotion. The air in that chamber must have shimmered with incense and breath, the silence broken only by the faint rasp of papyrus. In those moments, the scribe was neither mortal nor divine. He was the bridge between both. The fragments suggest he lived during the reign of Pepi II, when the old order of kings began to fade and Egypt's faith trembled under the weight of centuries. It was an age when pyramids were no longer raised, and wisdom began to scatter like dust. The priests of Memphis still chanted, but their voices were tired. Perhaps he knew the empire was fading, and sought to preserve its memory, not for kings, but for the afterlife itself. Somewhere in the chamber, near the remains of an inkstone, a small carving of a falcon was found, the eye of Horus set with lapis lazuli. Beneath it, etched in a single trembling line, were the words, "I wrote," so the world would not forget how to speak to the stars. When the archaeologists brushed away the sand, the stone still held warmth, as though the words had never cooled. In the Museum of Cairo, the fragments rest now in glass, anonymous, silent. Visitors pass by without knowing they once belonged to a man who believed writing could outlast the gods themselves. His hand is gone, yet the echo of his brush still lingers, somewhere between breath and eternity. And in the quiet of night, when the desert wind moves across Abydos, it sounds almost like the turning of pages that no longer exist. Perhaps he succeeded. Perhaps the afterlife he wrote for still reads him. There are places in Egypt where darkness itself seems to shimmer. Deep beneath the sands of Dendra, where the great temple of Hathor still carries the scent of incense and stone, explorers once uncovered a corridor that led nowhere. A sealed chamber carved without inscriptions, perfectly smooth, untouched by time. Yet when the first torches were lit, the room glowed not with fire, but with light that seemed to emerge from the stone itself. The discovery, made by a team of French excavators in the late 1800s, was recorded quietly and without fanfare. Their journals mention a strange luminescence, a pale, living glow that lingered for minutes after the torches were extinguished. Some dismissed it as reflection from mineral veins. Others whispered that it might be something else, a remnant of the old gods, perhaps, or the trace of an art now lost to men. Ancient texts from the Temple of Hathor describe rituals of light, ceremonies performed at dawn, invoking the sun's rebirth within the earth. The priest spoke of the breath that awakens stone, and of chambers where divine illumination was kindled from within. It was said that the gods did not descend from the sky. They rose from beneath, glowing like sunrise trapped underground. Imagine the silence there, the air cool, almost wet, carrying the taste of minerals and age. The walls, pale limestone polished to a mirror's smoothness, seem to pulse softly under the gaze of a single flame. Each surface reflects another until the room feels infinite, like standing inside a captured dawn. The Dendra temple complex was known for its astronomical ceiling, a carved map of the cosmos that still puzzles scholars. Beneath that sacred geometry, the light chamber might have been built as its counterpart, a physical echo of the stars below the earth. If the heavens were above Hathor, perhaps the gods kept their reflection beneath her. Modern science offers small answers. Some speculate that the walls contained phosphorescent calcite, capable of absorbing sunlight through narrow shafts and releasing it slowly in darkness. Yet no such shafts were ever found. Others point to the presence of natron and alabaster, materials that refract and scatter light almost supernaturally when polished and charged with heat. But even these explanations cannot capture what witnesses described: a glow that flickered like breathing, dimming and returning in perfect rhythm. When the archaeologists tried to photograph it, the plates came out blank. The light refused to be captured. There is a passage in the Book of the Hidden Chamber, part of the coffin texts, that speaks of the light that lives without flame. It is described as a gift of Thoth, a luminous essence meant to guide the dead through the tunnels beneath the western horizon. Perhaps the priests who built this chamber sought to recreate that celestial glow, not for the living, but for the souls passing through it, a rehearsal of eternity. Standing there, one might have felt as though the walls were inhaling. The light would fade, then bloom again, as if responding to breath. Some explorers described the sound of a faint vibration, like the hum of bees within stone. They left the place undisturbed, sealing it once more. No one has entered it since. The passage was buried beneath restoration layers, and its exact position has vanished from official maps. A few old notes remain, coordinates half erased, a sketch of walls curving like petals, and a sentence underlined twice: light without source. Perhaps it was never meant to be explained. Perhaps it was built not to illuminate, but to remember what illumination feels like, that brief threshold where darkness is no longer absence, but presence. In the end, light and silence are not opposites. They are the same breath caught at different moments. The chamber beneath Dendra may still glow somewhere in the earth, unseen, patiently breathing in the dark. And maybe, when night is deep enough, the sands above it faintly shine. Night descends over the ruins of Akhmim, once known as Panopolis, birthplace of forgotten queens and astronomer priests. The stars unfold like parchment above the Nile, and somewhere beneath the crumbling temples lies the tomb of a woman whose name has almost dissolved in time. Queen Neithotep, consort of Egypt's first dynasty. Her monuments are older than language, her story older than history. And yet, when the wind moves across the desert, her presence feels near, like a constellation that remembers being seen. The records tell little. A few fragments from Nakata and Abydos bear her name beside that of King Narmer, the unifier of Upper and Lower Egypt. But in the inner chambers of her shrine, archaeologists found something unusual: celestial symbols carved in patterns unknown to any other tomb of the period. Stars arranged not as constellations, but as paths, spirals, and crossings, as though mapping the motion of souls rather than suns. Among the ruins, faint pigments of cobalt and gold still cling to the stone. The ceilings shimmer with traces of a night sky rendered by hand. One symbol repeats: a woman raising her arms toward a cluster of stars, the ancient glyph for Seshet, goddess of writing and measurement, the keeper of cosmic order. Some scholars believe Neithotep was not merely a queen, but a priestess of this sacred science, one who could measure the heavens with her memory. The ancients believed that the soul was born among the stars and returned to them after death. Pharaohs sought to ascend as Orion or Sirius, but Neithotep's texts speak differently. Her inscriptions describe descent, not ascent, a journey back into the womb of the cosmos. She called it the returning light. When the archaeologist Emile Amelino uncovered parts of her burial site in the 1890s, he noted the absence of any funerary furniture, any sarcophagus, any trace of mummification. Only sky maps, painted in lapis blue. The absence itself was an offering. She went where light sleeps. One line reads, her voice became horizon. At dusk, when the stars rise over the desert, the temple stones seem to shimmer faintly, as though remembering that ritual. The alignment of her tomb, oriented not toward the sun, like other royal graves, but toward the rising of Sirius, hints that her reign was devoted to the calendar of the stars. In those early dynasties, astronomy was not science. It was prayer measured in silence. Perhaps she spent her nights on the roof of her temple, surrounded by acolytes holding copper mirrors, watching the reflections of the heavens ripple upon still bowls of water. Each ripple a prophecy, each reflection a verse. The fragments of her seal show the image of a woven net, believed to represent the sky itself, the net of Neith, goddess of creation. And so, her name, Neithotep, means Neith is at peace, but the pattern carved beside it seems restless, a spiral turning endlessly inward. Maybe she remembered something others forgot, that the stars are not distant fires, but echoes of beginnings. That to remember the heavens is to remember what humanity once was before the first temple, before the first prayer. In the Cairo Museum rests a single bead from her necklace, made of meteoritic iron, smooth as glass. It is said the bead fell from her chest when the tomb was opened. The archaeologist who found it wrote that it glimmered with its own light, even in shadow. They placed it behind glass, but in the dim museum hall it still seems to pulse, faint, steady, as though the queen herself continues to breathe through metal and memory. The desert around Akhmim is silent now, its dunes erasing the roads that once led to her sanctuary. But when the wind rises at night, it moves in circles, lifting sand into patterns that mimic constellations. Locals say it is the queen drawing her stars again, her memory painting the sky she refused to leave. Perhaps she never died at all. Perhaps she simply returned to where light begins, not to rule, but to remember. And tonight, as the stars awaken above the Nile, one might look upward and find her there still, tracing the heavens with hands made of wind and time. In the heart of the great sand sea, between Egypt and Libya, there lies a silence so complete it seems to erase time itself. The dunes stretch unbroken for hundreds of miles, their surfaces rippling like frozen water. But beneath this desolation, explorers have found something extraordinary. A river that never flowed, a memory of fire turned to glass. The first pieces were discovered in 1932 by Patrick Clayton, a British surveyor charting the Libyan desert. He noticed patches of translucent stone scattered across the sand, smooth, greenish-yellow, glinting like sunlight trapped in crystal. Locals called it Zara al-Sara, The desert blossom. Scientists named it Libyan desert glass, one of the purest natural silicas on Earth. Some fragments were as clear as ice, others like molten honey. To the ancient Egyptians, this glass was sacred, a jewel cut from the breath of the gods. Archaeologists later found a scarab carved from this same glass in the burial pectoral of Tutankhamun. Its color a radiant yellow-green, like a captured dawn. They believed it held the power of rebirth, forged in the furnace of the heavens. But how was it made? There are no volcanoes here, no lava fields. The desert floor bears no sign of eruption. The glass lies in sheets and droplets, scattered across hundreds of square kilometers, as if a storm of light had once passed through the earth. Some say it was the mark of a celestial event, an ancient meteor exploding above the sands, its heat fusing quartz grains into liquid fire. Others imagine something older, stranger, a ritual of the gods, a divine alchemy performed at the edge of creation. When you hold a piece of desert glass, it hums faintly in your hand, cool yet alive. Its surface ripples with microbubbles, each one a breath of air sealed for millions of years. Under the microscope, it glows with traces of zircon crystals, deformed by temperatures higher than any volcano, over 1,700 degrees Celsius. The glass remembers what stone cannot, the moment when earth became liquid and sky became flame. Legends of the Sahara Berbers speak of a river of light that once ran beneath the dunes, a path followed by the first travelers into the west. They said it glowed at night, guiding nomads through sandstorms. Some claim that, during moonless nights, a faint shimmer still runs below the surface, moving with the wind like a buried current. Modern explorers have found streaks of fused sand running deep underground, ancient veins of the same glass, continuous for miles. To walk above them at dusk is to feel a strange stillness, as if the desert were breathing beneath your feet. In the twilight, when the air cools and the horizon blurs into gold, the dunes begin to reflect that hidden shimmer. The entire plain takes on a ghostly sheen, like water glimpsed through sleep. Perhaps this is why early travelers called it the river that does not flow. Somewhere near Gebel Kamel, fragments of meteoritic iron have been found, sharp, twisted, fused with glass. The evidence suggests a massive explosion long before recorded history. Yet science cannot say when the fire fell or how it shaped itself into beauty. The ancients did not call it an accident. To them, it was divine memory, the mark left when heaven and earth once touched. A relic of the creation fire, preserved in silence. If you were to walk this land at night, under a full moon, the glass would catch the light and scatter it like stars across the ground. Each fragment a reflection of the sky, as if the heavens had shattered and fallen here. Perhaps this is what the Egyptians meant when they placed it upon their young king's heart. A piece of eternity, cooled by time. A river that once flowed not with water, but with light. And even now, somewhere beneath the dunes, that river waits, unseen, unbroken, flowing in silence beneath the sleep of the world. There are tombs in Egypt that bear names carved so deeply they seem eternal. And then there is one that bears none. Hidden among the limestone cliffs of Abydos, near the sacred path of Osiris, explorers once found a burial chamber that defied every royal tradition. No cartouche, no epitaph, no image of the king, only silence, and a single line carved in delicate hieroglyphs. He who erased his name lives forever. The chamber was first uncovered in the early 20th century, near a collapsed complex believed to date to the First Intermediate Period, an era when Egypt fractured and its gods fell quiet. The walls were unusually bare, where other tombs shimmered with gold leaf and murals of divine ascent. This one was smooth and gray, as though the occupant had asked the stone to forget him. Yet traces of grandeur remained. Fragments of diorite, a broken ceremonial scepter, and a crown of gold beaten so thin it could vanish in the palm. Whoever had lain here once held power, not a priest or noble, but a king who chose disappearance over remembrance. In a recess behind the sarcophagus, archaeologists found something stranger still. A narrow tablet of obsidian, polished like a mirror. No writing, only a faint imprint of a hand, as though pressed there before the stone had cooled. Chemical analysis revealed traces of oil and resin, substances used only in funerary rites of the royal line. The inscription on the entrance puzzled every translator. Some believed it was heresy, an attempt to defy the funerary laws that demanded a name for passage into eternity. Yet, in certain esoteric texts, the erasure of the name was not death, but transcendence. The pyramid texts of Unas speak of the soul that passes beyond the words, becoming light itself. To erase the name was to return to origin, to dissolve the boundary between the mortal and the divine. Historians have debated who this pharaoh might have been. Some propose a lost son of Mentuhotep, others a ruler whose reign was erased by decree. But the chamber suggests something more deliberate, as though the king himself had chosen absence. The sarcophagus, carved from a single block of granite, bears no hieroglyphs, only subtle grooves that resemble ripples in water. Beneath it, a hidden cavity contained a single item, a small alabaster vessel filled with fine black dust. Laboratory study later revealed traces of burnt papyrus, the remains of what may have been royal decrees, ritual names, perhaps even his own. The act of burning one's own identity, scholars realized, was unprecedented in Egyptian burial. It was as if the ruler had written himself out of history, offering his silence as the final gift to the gods. On the ceiling, nearly invisible under centuries of soot, faint constellations were etched: Orion, Sirius, and the circumpolar stars, the same symbols used for the soul's eternal voyage. Yet above them, a single line diverges, a pathway leading nowhere, vanishing into blank stone. The artist had stopped mid-carving, as if forbidden to finish. Perhaps that was the point, a tomb not of remembrance, but of release. The air inside still carries a hum, a subtle vibration felt rather than heard, as though the stone remembers him even when his name does not. Some researchers who visited the site claimed to feel disoriented, as if time thickened inside the chamber. One wrote, "It was as though we were standing inside an unfinished thought. Outside, the desert wind moves endlessly over the cliffs. The sand fills what memory cannot. No plaque, no record, no monument bears his name. And yet, perhaps that was his triumph, to become untouchable by history, unbound by worship or forgetting. When night falls over Abydos, the stars gather above his resting place. Orion glows faintly through the haze. The wind carries whispers across the dunes, or perhaps just echoes of breath through the ancient corridors. Maybe he was never lost. Maybe he simply stepped beyond the reach of words, into the silence where eternity begins. There is a legend whispered among the priests of Hermopolis, the city of the 8 gods, that once, in the time before memory, a temple rose not from stone, but from air. They called it the House of Dawn. It was said to float above the horizon, its columns woven of sunlight, its reflection shimmering in the waters below. No foundation, no shadow, only the hum of hymns rising like wind through gold. For centuries, scholars thought it only myth. But in the 1960s, during surveys near the ruins of Ashmunian, aerial photographs revealed something curious: perfect geometric outlines in the desert soil, arranged in a circular pattern too precise for chance. Beneath the sand, ground-penetrating studies later confirmed layers of fused limestone, vitrified as though exposed to impossible heat. The pattern formed a ring, 12 points radiating from a center, like a wheel carved into the earth. No known temple matched its structure. Egyptian temples were linear, aligned to cardinal points. This one seemed built for the sky. Hermopolis was sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom, balance, and the moon. His priests were astronomers, mathematicians, and dreamers of light. They built observatories before the age of pyramids, charting the rhythm of celestial breath, the rising of Sirius, the pulse of the lunar tides. Some records from the Middle Kingdom speak of a sanctuary that lifted itself each morning and returned to rest with the setting of Ra. The phrase was long dismissed as metaphor, until the discovery of the circle beneath the sands. At sunset, the site glows strangely. Even now, pilots report a pale halo visible only in twilight, as though the ground itself remembers illumination. Scientists call it an optical mirage, atmospheric ionization caused by quartz dust. But local villagers tell another story. That sometimes, in the still hour before dawn, the sound of chanting rises from beneath the earth. Fragments of inscriptions found nearby speak of the temple that knew both sky and stone. The carvings mention pillars of air bound by song, and a gate that turned without touch. Could this have been an early experiment in architecture aligned not merely with stars, but with resonance, vibration, sound, light? The Egyptians believed creation itself began with a single word, the divine utterance of Thoth that shaped the world. Perhaps this temple sought to recreate that original sound, to lift the physical into the divine through harmony. The vitrified stones found beneath the dunes tell a story of intense energy, temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Some scientists suggested meteor impact. Others saw evidence of ancient lightning strikes. Yet the layout defies randomness. Each segment of the circle corresponds to a lunar station, 12 gates, matching the months, matching the measures of the moon. Was it a calendar, a celestial machine, or a hymn built in stone? One fragment of relief, preserved in the Cairo Museum, shows Thoth holding a temple suspended between his palms, with the caption, "I have weighed the light, to weigh light, to give it shape." Perhaps that was their mystery. If you stand among the ruins at night, when the air is cool and the horizon trembles, something almost imperceptible happens. The stars above Hermopolis seem to gather more densely, their reflections trembling in the mirage below. It is as if the sky remembers its twin. The priests believed the temple would one day ascend again, when balance returned to the cosmos. They called this moment the rising of silence. In their theology, the end was not destruction, but harmony, heaven and earth dissolving into one breath. Maybe that's why the stones glow faintly when touched by moonlight. Perhaps the temple never fell. Perhaps it simply sank, not into the ground, but into memory, waiting for the mind quiet enough to see it rise again.